You wouldn't give me all the praise if I caught an £18 canal barbel?
I'd say, cracking, bloody marvellous. What do you want to do? Jump up and dance and scratch my eyes out?
I think it's safe to say 2020 was a difficult year for everyone. It certainly affected my year in both terms of fishing and work. However, looking back, there are some positives I can take from it. Although lots of my fishing sessions weren't filmed, I wanted to put something together to look back on a different but eventful year. Here's an insight into my life and fishing adventures of 2020. After a brilliant late winter on the Coppermill Stream, I had high hopes for the year ahead. Unfortunately, my next venture was stopped in its tracks as the COVID-19 virus spread out of nowhere and it became obvious that a national lockdown was imminent. Unfortunately, my work hours were severely reduced and it just didn't feel safe travelling on public transport to go fishing, so I decided between my mum and dad that I'd be going home until things eased off a little bit. Of course, I wouldn't have been going without my fishing gear. If I'm honest, I was actually really looking forward to spending a little bit of time on the canals that I grew up on as a kid. So without wasting any time, I packed up my bags and I head off home on the last train before everything closed off completely. As soon as I arrived in my hometown Crewe, I set up on a local canal that I'd fished as a kid. Typically, the weather was terrible and the first night and day passed with not even a single bleep. Unfortunately, Boris then announced the bad news.
You must stay at home.
This lockdown meant that fishing and all other recreational sports were completely cancelled, so with that in mind I packed up and had to head home. The next month or so went, as I'm sure most of yours did, watching Netflix and spending time with family.
Sitting on the riverbank waiting for a bite. I've been there all flipping night. Up came the bailiff and he said to me, "Come on Frankie, come on have a Rosie Lee."
My dad built up quite the fan base with his antics, playing musical instruments around the house and singing about his ridiculous past captures.
The best thing ever I had in my life was catching a carp at £90. Its top lip was 12 or 13 pounds, and I said to myself, I'm going to ground, so fishing and so are you. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna stay at home like you, but I've gotta go out fishing in the blue, and I hope that I catch the same as you.
In between making up for lost family time, of course, I was going out and checking out local canals and lakes in hopes that I could find some carp to fish for when the lockdown was eased, and it didn't take long.
That's a unicorn.
Now this canal in particular, where I'd seen these really nice carp, was somewhere that I'd fished many years ago, maybe around the age of 14, 15, and I always remember my mate catching a brace of 20-pounders. So going back there and seeing this, I was really excited, and one of the fish looked really good, potentially upper 20. So of course I went home, buzzed up, got a load of bait and started to put bait in quite regularly in hopes that soon the government would announce that fishing was allowed. In perfect timing, that's exactly what happened. The government realised that fishing, amongst other outdoor recreational sports like golf, was actually good for mental health, and it was good for people to be outside, and also it had no real risk of spreading the virus any further. So with that in mind, you can imagine exactly where I was going. But someone actually messaged me on Facebook Messenger saying about how there was another stretch of canal that I was familiar with. The fish were really active and actually taking mixers off the top. So I put the first place that I'd been baiting to one side and set up a bag a rod and a small bag of mixers and persuaded my mum to drop me off straight away at this lovely stretch of canal. Is that my deck chair?
Yeah.
There's my lift, just in time. Upon arrival, I met up with the guy who told me about the fish being there. Of course, we stayed well apart, but we wandered up this canal and it was lovely. And it became apparent that the lack of foot traffic during the lockdown had meant the fish had made their way out of the marina and started venturing up and down the stretch. And immediately after arriving, we could see some decent looking fish cruising among the upper layers. Wasting no time, I wandered up with a rod and tried to find the best opportunity to present a hook bait in front of one of these fish. When I was wandering in the foliage, I heard right in the edge, and I snuck over as quietly as I could, and there it was. There was a 20-pounder just cruising on the mixers that had drifted into the near bank, and you could see it coming up. Quickly nipped a mixer on the hook and wandered a little bit up the bank and lowered this mixer slightly in front of this fish, and lo and behold, it came up and snaffled it clean, and I hooked straight into it.
I'm in. It's not happy.
You off, big boy?
Yes.
What a brilliant first fish to catch after being stuck at home for a couple of months. Now, although I was going to go to the other stretch of canal for the night where I'd been pre-baiting, I decided that because there was a lot of fish swimming up and down this stretch, that I might as well just stay here. So luckily, my brilliant mum drove down and dropped me off a bivvy and all the things I needed to stay the night. The fish had slightly moved off after hooking that one on the top, so I moved slightly closer to the area where the fish find a bit more of a safe haven, and I pitched up there for the night. I was knackered, so I got an early night. If I'm honest, I was slightly surprised to wake up to nothing. However, the sun was gleaming and it became apparent that the fish had started leaving the marina and making their way up the stretch. I actually remember one fish swimming right under my rod tip. Luckily, I was seconds away from reeling it in and having to go stalking, and it ripped off. Feels like a good fish as well. Might just be an angry one. Oh, he's off. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I'll be fine on me. Yes. Loads of scars, really old skin, definitely an old fish. Fantastic. What a brilliant first session that was. 2 20-pounders on my first trip. Couldn't have got off to a better start. However, that big one that I'd seen in the other stretch was really on my mind, and although there was lots of fish in this part to be caught, I knew that I wouldn't be back for a little while. So I went home, spent a little bit more time with mum and dad, kept going to that other stretch, baiting it in hopes that I could keep the fish on a small area. You weren't necessarily supposed to be fishing the exact part where I'd seen the fish, so my intention was to draw the fish out a little bit so that I could get there comfortably and do the nights and hopefully catch that big fish that I'd seen. I remember we didn't turn up till about 11 o'clock, and like I said, you weren't necessarily supposed to be fishing there. Although I'd drawn the fish out of the no fishing zone, we were still in a little bit of a residential area, so we wanted to stay as quiet as possible. We set up, We got the rods out on the bottom and we were having a chat, and it must have been about 12:30 at night, and out of nowhere I looked and you could see a big patch of fizzing coming up, so it was obvious that that fish was feeding on the bottom. So without wasting any time, I reeled a rod in. I remember it clear as day. I checked the hook point, I grabbed a couple of Scopex boilies, crumbed them up, and so slowly, in case this fish was still there, just dropped them. In fact, I almost leaned over the canal and put the boilies on the surface so that they didn't actually splash. I lowered the rig in, it went down with a real thud, so it was obviously a cleaned off area. And I walked back with the rod up the bank, and before I'd even put it down on the alarm and loosened the clutch, the rod was going in my hand. Now this was just such a surreal fight. This fish was just holding bottom the whole time. My mate went, that looks like a real good fish, mate. And I didn't even want to talk to him because I knew it was a good one. And it was under the rod tip, and after a long battle, this fish come up and we were both like, whoa! It just come up, this big pale thing, looked absolutely massive. Get him! That's the target, mate. Big one. As the sun rose, I woke my mate up and we got this fish out to have a look, and it was in fact the exact fish that I'd seen on my first few trips that was swimming along with that pack of fish. What an incredible first session. Come on. Come on, behave. So tense and angry. That's it. What a fish. 26 pounds and 8 ounces. Prehistoric canal carp. Week after lockdown, my target was a 25 plus. What a fish, absolutely blown away with this one. Really angry fish, dorsal sticking up, tensed up like mad, look at it. Proper canal unit. What an incredible turnout. To see this fish, to put some bait in, to actually catch it on my first night on the stretch, it couldn't have been any better. Now, although it was the fish that I'd seen, me and my mate both knew that it wasn't the only big one, so I was definitely going to be back. But first, there was a lovely little estate lake that I had to pay a visit. A small lake surrounded in countryside with an original stock of leanies from over 30 years ago. It was somewhere I'd fished before, and it was so nice to be back. I must have been 15 on my last visit, and I managed some incredible carp that trip. That style of fishing is something I'd not done for a while. With being in the city for so long, it was almost a breath of fresh air. I lowered a few rigs close in and scattered a handful of Scopex flake over the top. The fish moved in, and almost immediately I was in. Come on. Yes. Now that's what we came here for. Really shallow lake, so the fish don't grow that big. But with a scale pattern like that, such a dark, old little fish. Let's get her back in. Show you a look at him from here. Another wicked little carp. It was a lovely first day back on the lake, and I could only hope for another fish before packing up in the morning. Get in the net. Come on. Yes! Get in. Come on. Just get a little video and then we'll put you back. All tense. Probably the biggest, well, it is the biggest fish I've had as well, actually. I'd say he's about £15 maybe. Might even weigh him in a minute. Lovely stuff. Let's get packed up and go home. Thank you, mate. It was lovely spending time back at this little lake, and I will certainly return at some point in the future. My next few days were eventful to say the least. An old friend of mine called to ask if I'd be interested in viewing a river cruiser his uncle was selling. Now, I'd been looking for a boat the whole lockdown, so the fact that this dream could finally become a reality was just insane. I told my mum straight away that we had to view it, and I was already imagining the epic adventures. Unfortunately, it wasn't quite that easy. However, me and my mum and dad, after a lot of persuasion, did go and view this boat. Upon arrival, we could see the boat had some minor problems. However, overall was in pretty good nick and going for a good price. One thing I did notice was the name of it, the Kingfisher. Now, as you can imagine, my mum and dad were the sensible ones, and they tried to persuade me out of it by talking about the amount of work, money and time that it would take. Now, I was having none of it. I said, Mum, come on, the boat is called Kingfisher, I've got to buy it. Mum and dad were quite open to my excitement and agreed that they'd help me out in buying this boat. As you can imagine, I was absolutely buzzing. This dream had, in that moment, become a reality, and a couple of days later, this boat was driven and dropped in my front drive.
Jim. Oh, Jim. Jake, I was a bit concerned about the electrics there, so I've covered it in plastic.
The next few days were spent relentlessly working on this boat. It was in pretty good condition, but I wanted it perfect. At first it was mainly cleaning and getting the water out, and then ordering any things that I needed to turn it into the perfect fishing boat. Then painting and fitting the floorboards. It was coming along nicely. New seating and a fresh lick of paint was a game changer. It really was a dream come true having this to work on during the lockdown. I added some bank sticks as a final touch, and she was ready to go. Just got to get it to London now, eh? Although the boat was ready to go and the lockdown had fully eased off, I had a trip to Ashmead booked in the next couple of days, so I decided to stay home until then. I went out for a few day sessions on my local canal, but didn't manage to catch anything. I was then contacted by Macaulay from Carper's Yard. He had recently started up an app that presented fishing content and asked me if I'd be up for making a small piece on canal carping. I was more than up for it, so we met up for a 24-hour session. The first stretch we fished was somewhere I'd never caught a carp from, so the camera certainly brought some luck when only an hour after arriving I managed to hook one. Take that any day after saying we wanted to move. Pulling hard, they're not fished for around here, so. Yes! First fish from this stretch. I had in my head they were a lot smaller, but it's a lovely little pristine common, that. Buzzing.
Ooh, like it. Nice one. Nice carp.
Yeah, it's alright, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Lovely. Really long, angry fish. Probably never been caught before. Its mouth's immaculate. Wicked stuff. Let's get her back and hopefully we can have a few more. Well, it's been quiet for a couple of hours now, and although I do feel we'd probably catch in this spot if we stayed the night, I've got a feeling that we're better off going to another stretch that I've also been pre-baiting, and I had a really nice carp there a few days ago, and I just think the stamp of fish is a little bit better, so we're going to pack up now as quickly as possible to get there just before darkness, and hopefully we'll end up catching a few more. Well, this doesn't happen very often. It's my last trip on this stretch of canal, and this is one of the fish that I wanted. 26 pound an ounces, slate grey. It's got all little petal scales all over it, really withered skin. It's definitely one of the old ones, probably 40 years old. This is what I love about fishing canals. You just never know what's going to turn up. And in the middle of the night, I had a very hard fight with what is an incredible canal carp. So, pack up time. I've got a lot of sorting out to do today. I've got a much anticipated trip to Ashmead booked in the morning, and then I'll be back to London on new adventures with this boat. So for now, it's pack up time. But to be honest with you, I've really enjoyed my fishing, and it's been nice to be back home with family. And also, I set myself a little target to catch 3 25-pound plus fish. Although I've only caught 2, I'm not going to complain, because people around this area know that there's not a lot of big fish in these canals. And for me, it was just really about coming back to somewhere where I spent a lot of time fishing as a kid, and somewhere where I'd have dreamed about catching a mid-20 back then. So I'm really happy with how the session's gone, and I've ended on the target fish. My trip to Ashmead flew by. It's such an incredible lake. 3 days just isn't enough to take it all in. The fishing was tough, but nevertheless, always enjoyable. On the way home, I found out my boat surveyor had been held up for a few days, so I managed to sneak one more session in before heading back to London. The target this time though was a monster barbel. One my mate had caught from a canal over 6 years ago, and I'd always said if I go back home I'm gonna have to have a go for it. Not long after arriving, we got sidetracked by some carp feeding on the top. This wasn't an opportunity I could miss, so I flicked a bit of bread crust on and made a cast towards it. Unfortunately, the fish actually slipped the hook. It wasn't what I was there for, so I cracked on and got the rods out for the night. Now you wouldn't believe what fish I caught the following morning. Yep, the exact same double-figure canal barbel my mate had caught all those years ago. Unbelievable. It's my last night before going back to London. We fished this canal just for these big barbel. Rare as they come, you're not going to find a canal in this country with many big barbel in. Beautiful. Let's get her back in. It was so nice spending those couple of months with family, but I had a lot of work that I'd missed out on in London, and it was time to head back and start a real adventure. Now the reason I bought this boat is because I wanted to have something in London that could set me off on some real adventures. Somewhere I could go with friends, somewhere I could target really cool looking fish and just have a lot of time enjoying myself. With that being said, I'm not going to be documenting the most part of my fishing on this boat because I would like to keep it private. However, I am going to show you the first few adventures that the Kingfisher set out on. After a 5-hour drive, we finally arrived at the marina. I'd never driven a boat in my life, so I was super nervous. After a few attempts, we got us started, and what a buzz it was cruising off down the canal. Off on a new adventure. This day was spent taking in the surroundings, enjoying the sunshine, and even a bit of fish spotting. As much as I'd have liked to have fished that night, I'd left a life behind for months, so the boat was tied off and left for at least a short while. Before the lockdown in March, I'd started selling my own fishing tackle at the small aquatic store I worked at. I'd only got a small order to start with, and days after it arrived, I moved up north due to the pandemic, so it was really bad timing. However, while I was gone, the shop owner managed to sell a fair amount, which meant when I came back, a few added stands and a fresh delivery had the shop looking much better. Along with that, me and my partner had bought a houseboat, so it was a hectic few days moving house and getting to grips with boat life. With that out of the way, it was finally time for my first trip on the fishing boat. That big gravel hole down there, that's definitely a feeding spot. We're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz. I spent most of the day looking, and after hours of cruising up and down miles of canal, I managed to find a few carp. I baited a few areas just up from where I'd seen them and moored the boat securely for my first night. I tested the fresh rigs I tied in planning for this trip, and it was now just a case of sitting back and taking it all in. I'd made it happen. All that hard work, and I was finally here sitting back with the rods out on my own little fishing boat. I hardly slept that night, no doubt with dreams full of monster carp. Would I wake up to the vibration of a ticking clutch followed by a screaming siren? In reality, no. But on this occasion, the unthinkable happened. Whoa, whoa, whoa! Ready?
On the right.
Try and look in the net if you can see anything. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Come on. Come on. Yes! Get in! Christen the Kingfisher. First night. First one off the boat. Did 5 miles yesterday, just cruising up and down, enjoying myself. Right at the bottom end, found a couple of fish. I thought that'll do me. Dropped a couple of rigs off the side of the boat, and can't complain with that for the first fish. Old wood carving of a common. The boat is christened. Hopefully many more wicked fish and adventures to come. Thank you, mate. Before I left for work, I put a good scattering of bait out. I was already planning my next trip on the train home, but first I had a few jobs to do on the other boat.
So he turns around and he's got sealant all on his hands and he's like, where is that coming from? And he's just gone and stood right in it. Oh my God.
I'd also built a pond in Stacey's mum's garden when I first moved in, so it was time to empty that and see how my fish were doing before bringing them to the shop to be rehomed. So it's harvest time. Put some little scalies in last year and they have spawned already. Hey. Sick carp. Oh, look at him, he's just spawned. Look, he's the spawner. Beautiful fish. Little hole for the pads. With the fish transported to the shop and safely released, it was time for my next trip on the boat. I started off where I'd left off, but surprisingly, 2 days later the bait was still there. So I ended up heading a few miles up the canal and exploring some new areas. It was a lovely day, and I did actually manage to stumble across a couple of small fish quite a bit further up, so I settled there, and not long after getting the rods out, I was in. Yes, get in. That's a good fish. Yeah.
Just down here.
Yeah. Absolute corker. Thank you very much. Blown away. Obviously the level that we're at now is just perfect. There's the line just down the edge. Both bites. Second one we were actually standing on the boat moving, so proves that they're not bothered about people on boats. It's really warm, sun's out, crystal clear, but they're obviously still feeding, and it's perfect just for me to sit in here. I can see when they're fizzing, and I can see sometimes even fish cruising along the side of the boat. So it's literally what dreams are made of. I've been looking forward to little trips like this for a long time. Another lovely jet black common ended the perfect second trip. It was then time to spend an evening with Stacey. Luckily, I persuaded her to do the night with me on a small dock close to home. We had a takeaway and watched the sunset on a lovely evening, and I even managed to catch a few fish. After work, I prepared some bait, then I was back at it. This time I met up with a good mate Shane, and after showing him around the city, we made our way to the first spot I'd fished. But this time, the bait was gone and the spot was gleaming. We flicked some rods out and chilled for the evening, but it was more of a social as Shane had never fished in the city before. We had a barbecue and crashed out for the night, and at 6 AM, a siren went into absolute meltdown.
Mate, she's jet black. Is this record sound as well?
Although I was happy to have caught, I had a strange feeling, and after looking at the fish properly in the net, I realised I'd caught this fish before. I was gutted Shane didn't have it, to be honest, because it's a wicked little character, but I had a quick pick and let it go. A trip to Belgium was the next adventure. It was my first carp fishing trip outside of the UK, so I was absolutely buzzing. With COVID restrictions, the fishing was actually quite difficult, but after making our way around numerous venues, the trip came good in the end, with some incredible carp landed by both me and the lads. That's a proper one, innit?
How much is it?
About £28.
Nice.
Thank you.
Mate, I think this is absolutely massive. The one we saw was easily £40. Get it! That's the big one! Get it! You'll have to wait to see exactly what went down on that trip. With that, the summer was slowly coming to an end, so I picked my next few sessions wisely and aimed to catch a couple more special fish before the warm weather completely disappeared. A few heavy bait emissions saw me land a handful of really nice carp. I filmed a few more features for Carper's Yard, then spent the majority of October working, which almost led me to my winter campaign. For now, the boat was tied up and it was nearly time for a new chapter. My next and final part of this video is a very short session where I managed to get super lucky and catch the biggest fish in the lake in the matter of 10 minutes. So I was actually meeting a good friend of mine, Mike Tobin, and he was helping me out with a little bit of editing. I think this was towards the end of summer, and after being cooped up indoors all day, Mike said, look, the weather's really good outside, let's go out to one of the local lakes of mine and hopefully we can bag a fish or two in the evening. He took me to this small lake. You weren't necessarily supposed to be fishing there, it's a recurring theme with me, but yeah, he took me over there, we walked across this little bridge, and immediately after looking over we could see numerous different carp feeding, most of which were small, some ghosties and kois and a bit of everything in there. So what we decided to do was, we only had a single rod with us with a small controller float on, so we decided to take turns in casting. Mike went first and I was stood up on the bridge dropping in the floaters and watching the fish feeding as Mike would then make his cast on top of the fish. Strike! Oh! Strike! Done ya. Next up it was my turn, and what happened next was just ridiculously lucky. I made a cast and Mike just, you could see his face up on the bridge light up, and I remember him running down the hill going, it's the big un, it's the big un. He went, it's not gone under the bridge, has it? And he literally had like 8-pound line on. The fish had gone all the way around the bridge, around these pillars and all sorts, and he was like, oh, you're not going to land it. Oh, 8-pound line. This is scary stuff, I'm not going to lie to you. Snags left and right. Tiny hook on. Oh no. Don't go left or right, please. How's your luck, Mike? First cast, oh, second cast. Blimey.
It's not the first time you've done it, is it, Jacob, mate?
I'm a bit jammy, aren't I? Honestly, the amount of fish in here feeding on the top, like,
And you go and have that one.
ridiculous. How many? And I've caught the biggest one. How big do you reckon it is? 20 pounds?
Between 26 and 27 normally. Yeah.
So Mike said, yeah, I know a little place we can have one off the top. He said there's one big one. Hopefully I can land it. It's a really small hook with a rubber fake bait on, so there we go, it's nearly ready. Come on, you old creature. Come on, get in the net. The hook is right on the corner. Get in the net. Get in the net. Get in the net. Is it in? Is it in? Oh.
Yes, mate.
Get in! Talk about luck. Jesus, let me have a look at that. That is a gnarly carp. Look at that. Buzzing. Thanks, Mike.
You're welcome, mate.
How's your luck? Literally half an hour, couple of mixers and risers out there, and I've managed, out of a stock of probably 40-50 carp, I've managed the big one out first go. Thanks for Mike. Thanks to Mike, should I say. Really, really old fish. No doubt a few stories to tell. Thank you very much, mate. Let's get her back. Wicked stuff. Really old fish, that. Thank you, mate. Off in the pot. Well, there it is. The end of a difficult but overall really enjoyable year. Now, this video has been slightly different to my previous ones in terms of I'd usually campaign and target a certain fish. However, last year was so up and down and most of my campaigns were cut short, which resulted in me putting all the clips together and making one final edit. I really hope you've enjoyed it, and I've got a lot more content on the way. So thanks for watching, and most importantly, stay safe. Honestly, mate, I'm absolutely buzzing for you.
She's beauty, ain't she?
That, mate, that's made the trip for me, that has.
Queen of the lake.
Look at that. You've got the nice red eye. Look at that. Oh, mate. Oh, mate, turn the camera off. Turn the camera off. That's horrendous fish care. Just put it back, mate. That's disgusting, that. You just... And again. Mate, that is not on. That's a creature. Really? Yeah, go on. Oh, swimming off, mate. Give it a little splash.
It's the best part, isn't it?
Give it a little splash. Nice. Nice work, mate.